Welcome to the Place for History on the KY3 Digital Desk. We're joined today by Dr. Kevin Straight, the museum curator of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And we're talking today about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And I have to say, when I went back and rewatched this, a couple things grabbed my attention. One, I saw it in black and white. I didn't remember seeing it in black and white, and that's striking. And the second thing I noticed is some people either seem tired or bored at the start of the speech. It certainly didn't end that way.
That's right. Well, it had been a long weekend of events, and it ended with Dr. King's speech that I believe was supposed to be around 4 minutes, but it ended up being longer. It ended up being around 16 minutes, and it captivated the nation and really the entire world with Dr. King speaking at the feet of the Lincoln Memorial.
You have this speech on loan right now. How did the speech originally wind up at Villanova?
Well, let's just begin with what we have on display is the printed speech that was held and read by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. while delivering his I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963. The speech was printed in Dr. King's hotel really just moments before the march. And our display features the 3 pages for our audiences to view at the museum until September. The speech was first acquired by George Raveling, who in 1963 was a 26-year-old volunteer working at the March on Washington. He was working security for Dr. King, and he simply asked Dr. King for his copy as he exited the podium stage. Mr. Raveling, of course, has had a wonderful career as a Hall of Fame basketball coach, but he's also an avid collector of memorabilia, and he thankfully kept this copy safe over the years and eventually brought the speech to Villanova University. Our museum has worked with Villanova to secure a long-term loan, and as I mentioned before, it's on view in our Defending Freedom gallery until September of this year.
So how does that process work where you get something on loan, whether it's short term or long term? Do you have to negotiate? I'm going to have insurance. I'm going to pay a certain amount. What is that process like for something this important?
Right. It's a standard process in a sense, working with institutions, as long as everyone sort of meets the same sort of specifications and qualifications for displaying materials. But working with Villanova University, we worked with them for a number of years actually on this specific loan. It is a sort of long and drawn out process that I won't go into too many details. Rather, I'll just say that it's a process where we're engaged with not only Villanova University but also Mr. Raveling to display it in its full capacity, but also to care for the object. It's a very delicate object, just as on 3 pages of paper. It's very small and very delicate. So we have to go through basically all the regulations to get in accordance with everyone to display it in the first place.
It's not something, it sounds like, that works out overnight. It takes a little bit of time.
Certainly, a lot of time, a lot of patience, but that's the work we do.
Now, I went through the museum and I looked at the display, and as you mentioned, 3 pages. I don't believe I saw, unless I missed it, the phrase "I have a dream" in the printed copy. Is that correct?
That is correct. As I mentioned before, it was initially just intended to be a 4-minute speech, but it ended up being around 16 minutes because of the added lines from Dr. King. And Dr. King had a friendship with the great gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who had been to many of his speeches, like in Selma and Detroit. where King had been using his now iconic "I Have a Dream" line. As you can see in the copy on display, the words aren't printed, and he added it to the March on Washington speech after Mahalia Jackson urged him from the crowd to tell the nation about his dream. So he essentially improvised, the words that have really come to define an entire generation of the civil rights movement.
In a book by Thomas Ricks, he says the March on Washington took the civil rights movement from a Southern issue to the national stage. Do you agree that this speech helped take it beyond a regional issue?
Oh, certainly. The work of Dr. King and others had been going on for years, of course, but it's the March on Washington that really put it in the national discourse, as well as our collective memory. In a sense, I think when people recall the civil rights movement, this speech and the March on Washington are among the first things that sort of naturally come up, not only for people who were there, but for people who study and research the time. But it's a seminal moment in American history where Dr. King really calls upon the nation to really bring into focus racism in our collective consciousness and removing it, so that we could work towards a more just society.
What does the speech mean to America today, not just to historians?
I think, I think whether it's a speech or just Dr. King's messaging in general, I think at the heart of it is this continual need to press on and to fight against injustice wherever and whenever it presents itself. As Dr. King essentially characterizes it, when he talks about justice, it's a long and good fight. So I think that there's always a need to essentially continue the work and vision laid out by Dr. King and many others that sets the stage for us developing a more just and equitable society. When I think about it today, our digital age has really sort of changed the ways that we connect and gather and mobilize around these kinds of topics. But you can see that legacy in our youth-driven protests of today, where issues of race, along with other societal issues, are brought forth with the demand for change in the pursuit of justice and equality. I think Dr. King's messages, which are outlined in the speech and all of his messaging, still have an audience, and there's still a need to carry out his work today.
So how far are we from that line in his speech about not judging a person by the color of their skin, but the content of their character?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, as I said, that there's still a need for us to not only display the speech for people to take it to heart, take the messaging to heart, because the things that Dr. King, of course, was messaging about and fighting against are still prevalent in our society today. This is a really incredible artifact. It's a physical representation of one of the most important moments in the discourse of civil rights in the 20th century. It's been enormously popular with our visitors, who I think appreciate the up-close display where they can, get a firsthand look. And it's, of course, situated within our broader exhibition on segregation and civil rights. But it's such an important piece of our nation's history. The speech was, as I mentioned, drafted to be a shorter one, but Dr. King added these lines to make it the memorable speech that we know. And part of what's memorable about it really is how it draws upon our nation's seminal civil text, from the Declaration of Independence to the Emancipation Proclamation to the Gettysburg Address, all sort of to create this powerful rallying cry for the civil rights and for Americans in general, to encourage Americans to imagine this world without racism.
one thing I noticed when I was there is probably about a 5-year-old with his mom, and he said, "Mom, it's the dream speech." And she picked him up and showed him, and then she said, "Come over here." And there's a video display nearby, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And they watched the video presentation, and it just struck me that there's a whole new generation vaguely aware of this, but also seeing the speech and then learning about the history of the time. What do you think when you hear stories like that, that your work is introducing this to a whole new generation?
Well, it's encouraging. It's encouraging in a variety of ways to, have an audience for the work, of course, but just on a personal level to see people connect with it, um, to hear that kind of story where a parent is teaching their child about these important moments in our nation's history, and perhaps even segueing towards a discussion about how it relates to our everyday lives today. That's all important. We want the museum to be the type of place where this kind of discussion is fostered, where it's nurtured, where it's allowed, where people can talk about the past and think about how it shapes our present and our future.
Again, how long do people have if they want to go to Washington, D.C. and see the original pages and the display? And not just that, but the entire museum. How long do they have, though, to see this particular document?
Well, this document will be on display in our segregation gallery until September of this year. We're working on, it's part of a long-term loan with Villanova University, so I can't tell you what the future holds past that date right now. But we're thrilled and honored to display it right now, and it will be on display until September.
All right. Dr. Kevin Straight, Museum Curator, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We appreciate you being with us on the KY3 Digital Desk for the Place for History. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.